Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, and first let me add my voice in welcoming the Senator Joachim to this honorable house and extend good wishes, and do hope that we all share and have a productive time here as we all seek to make our contribution in this honorable house. Madam President, let me also grant you leave to also convey my condolences in the passing of Sir Alistair McIntyre, as was presented by the leader of government business, and also, Madam President, to recognize and to congratulate Senator on the new role that she has now undertaken in this honorable house. Madam President, during the debate of the lower house 2 weeks ago, while I was here paying attention, listening to the debate, my cousin Wilson Joseph died on the port. He was crushed by a container in an accident, and he lost his life. And he was buried just a few days ago. But Madam President, during that same time, within 2 months, his mom and himself, we also buried an uncle and an aunt. So in this family, we buried 3 members of our families within 2 months. And only last week, the spouse of a member from the same family living right next door died in the car accident on the Bad Mill. And yesterday, Madam President, I attended the funeral of my homeroom teacher at the Entrepot School who passed, Miss Angelina Jean. Such a powerful lady who impacted my life so significantly. Madam President, I know my cousin, we call him, has passed, and his mom, my aunt, and the sisters and brothers are still mourning. But especially my aunt bearing both her brother and her sister and her son within 2 months. I know this is severe, and such occasions do happen. But I reflect, Madam President, on life as it presents itself to us. And this courage we must have to accept it. And with this sentiments of being here, I am humbled to be alive this morning and thankful that I can share with this honorable house. And as I do so, I do reflect on the absence of the former senator and do wish him well as well. Madam President, but the substantive discussion here this morning relates to the appropriation bill that was presented in this honorable house by the Prime Minister. Madam President, I did not just look at the appropriation bill, but I juxtaposed it by the 2 other bills that has been presented in this house. So this administration has presented 3 bills before this house. They're all about the same, 1.5, 1.4, we are near $1.6 billion, Madam President. And what I notice about the appropriation bill, Madam President, they almost seem as if it were a cookie cutter repeating the same sort of rhythm. So you could get the rhythm in the preparation of the appropriation bill, and Madam President, I can leave here and thank you. I can leave and almost put it together. Thanks, Senator. And I also want to recognize, although I did, the children who are present here this morning. You're extremely welcome coming from all the way in Beaufort. I said to them earlier on, I hope all of them become parliamentarians in the future and serve us as well. But Madam President, it's my opinion that the budget as presented lacks innovation. And I'm not being extremely critical. To me, it's not responsive to the current times and situation. Madam President, when you juxtapose this new appropriation bill that seeks to spend $1.6 billion, considering that we have spent $3 billion, this administration, over the term that they have served thus far, And you ask, what is $3 billion? Madam President, $3 billion can construct 30 hospitals at $100 million each. So if we had taken $3 billion, we could have constructed 30 hospitals. Wow, it's amazing. Yes, it is. I'm a quantity surveyor, and that's what I'm trained in. Madam President, you could have built 20,000 residential units, $30 billion. I'm just, Madam President, saying this so that we can understand the magnitude of what we're speaking when we discuss the appropriation bill or the monies before us. Albeit that the monies are apportioned to do different things. But I would ask the children, or ask, what have you experienced over the 3 years as it relates that $3 billion have been spent by the administration over the past 2 years? What has changed? Well, of course, the leader of government business say, hooray, she's happy, the emergence of the barbecue trays. It's starting. After spending $3 billion, people are now starting to do their barbecues by the street. I'll come back to this. But the economy has grown by 1.5%. And not 3% as was promised by the Prime Minister in his previous budget. Not 3%. He promised 3, but we only grew by 1.5%. But I ask the question, who has grown with the economy? As the Chileans put it, Chile si se contigo, Chile grows with you. Has anybody in this economy, has there been any growth with the economy? Who has grown? Where is the growth? Who is experiencing that growth? I ask. Madam President, I will come back to this point. But one of the backdrop to this presentation, I believe the healthcare situation is indeed a problem, and we must look at it. Crime continues to rise, and it continues to be a challenge for us, for all of us. And whereas I heard Madam President spoke about she walked from Bexar to Comprehensive, these days it's not safe, Madam President, to walk the streets. Madam President, whereas the criminals may be in the minority, you do not need 5 dead frogs to spoil an entire neighborhood. One person can be a menace in a community. You notice? So it's not the question of how many persons who are participating, it's how do you feel? Do you feel safe? Madam President, my office is on Brazil Street. And while I was in Dominica, and I saw that lifeless body right next to my office, you know, on the ground, right next to where I go to the barber and cut my hair, I do not even want to speak to the guy who I normally speak, who was sitting there. I say, I don't want you to speak to me. I don't even want to know what you've seen. I'm afraid. That's the reality. I'm afraid of the times. I'm afraid by the way people believe, broad daylight, they could go and commit this thing. I mean, this is a different time that we live in, Madam President. It was not like that in time past. So we have a serious issue with crime. And more importantly, Madam President, we can all agree there is a problem with leadership in this part of the world, in St. Lucia. Who is leading? There are a lot of managers. And I dare say to you, through you, Madam President, to the children, that is one thing to be a manager, is another thing to be a leader. Because when you are a leader, you need to carry next to you your altar of sacrifice, because you need to do things that are unpopular. And sometimes you need to go down for the things that you believe. Leadership can be a lonely place. And if you're head of the Students' Council, sometimes your friends might disagree with you, but you are leading. You must have guts. You must believe in something to lead. I am not feeling the presence of somebody leading. All I can feel is quite a few managers managing. Madam President, direct purchase, form of procurement, is an issue. Direct purchase. And of course, I will explain what it is. So those listening through you, Madam President, the issue of just awarding a contract without tendering. And that has allowed in Fair Helen for there to be a perception of corruption pervading our business atmosphere, a perception of corruption. Madam President, the other point that I just need to draw to your attention, we need to be consistent in how we present ourselves to the people of St. Lucia. During, and I've always made reference to the campaign period, our dear Prime Minister presented himself in the south of the island as a religious leader. That form he took on caused people to believe in him, especially as it were the Roman Catholic faith. Yet, Madam President, I noticed the most solemn day in the 40 days Lent, Good Friday, as if it were people are being led to indulge. Madam President, there are some things that are not immoral, they are not wrong, but they are inappropriate. When you are a leader, Madam President, all of these things come together because see what we are dealing with in St. Lucia. I leave this, Madam President. And finally, Madam President, in just my summary, I think I've heard people say, these politicians, they never had it so good, and we never had it so bad. So in this summary, Madam President, I can capture this appropriation bill under three headings. One, a lack of fiscal responsibility as presented because of excess borrowing. Two, the issue of procurement and the absence of leadership. Let us take on the first one. Lack of fiscal responsibility, which is the balancing relationship between your revenues and your spending. Madam President, a good definition for fiscal responsibility, it means that if the economic cycle is at a stage of normal growth, then the government tax receipts must be greater than the government spending. That's what it means. It means, therefore, your table in the dining room cannot be larger than your kitchen. You cannot eat more than you can grow. You understand? I wouldn't say the Creole, but my grandaunt had some really, really strong way of saying it in Creole. This is really what fiscal responsibility is all about, this balancing act. If the government is running a deficit, a deficit budget, then it will be forced to cut spending or increase taxes to meet the shortfall. This government reduced tax from 15% to 12.5%. But there has been borrowing and more borrowing. And because of rebasing, because we revalue the economy, the Prime Minister declares that the fiscal deficit is within managerial limits. And the operative word there is limits. But what does that mean? And of course, if you take a cursory look at three of the presentations made in this Honorable House, the net financing requirements for 2017-2018 was $240 million. They need to get $240 million to support the budget. In 2018-2019, it was $197 million. And 2019-2020, it is $332 million. Increased. So what does this mean, Madam President? I am not an economist. I'm more comfortable as a quantity surveyor. But I'll tell you, Madam President, all of the research has shown when you are approaching such statistics, you are heading to the IMF, or you are nearing the IMF. And the IMF, when you go to the IMF, what happens? The middle class, the lower class get destroyed, obliterated. Not the owners of hotels, no car dealers, no owners or directors of manufacturers. The middle class, employees, teachers, nurses get decimated when you go to the IMF. And just to make this point even clearer, Madam President, I just want to read a short quotation, just a short quotation from a paper from a student from the University of the West Indies, Cape Verde. She wrote a short paper, and if anybody needs it, I could share it with you. She just happened to be my daughter, Madam President. It's a short paper, Jeremy Henry. The negative consequences of Barbados' implementation of IMF policies in the 1980s and the early 1900s were heavily felt by the middle and lower classes. According to Krista Hines and Jeremy Stevens in the article, Fiscal Crisis in Barbados, comparing the early 1990s and post-2008 crisis, the actions, that's by the IMF policies, made life difficult for the middle strata of the population by cutting their purchasing power and their abilities to service loans, and also had ripple effects through the economy by imposing hardships on businesses, some which were forced to close, worsening the unemployment problem, imposing hardship on the working class who may have received assistance from middle-class family members. What is more, she said, it was the burden was predominantly on female-headed households. And in closing, she said, in conclusion, the writer is of the view that structural programs are poor quick fix solution to economic crisis in developing countries, as it was seen in Jamaica and Barbados. The policies of these structural adjustment programs result in many cutbacks and setbacks, placing these developing countries in bigger economic crisis than they were in the first place. Unquote. And this is why the issue of fiscal irresponsibility is a road that you navigate, and sometimes the consequences of the action are down the road or around the corner, and you seem to be okay. But when you arrive at that position, the people who pay for it are not those who've taken you there. And therefore, I'm saying to the government, it is time that we reconcile strongly the issue of how we continue to borrow. But that brings into focus, Madam President, the issue of procurement. Because when things are bad, all St. Lucians are supposed to pay for it in this country. And I ask the question, Madam President, a significant part of what we do in the business of government is to buy services, goods, and works, a procurement business. Madam President, whenever we speak of things that are wrong or things the government is doing that is not right, there's always somewhat like a statement made that you used to do it too. And that serves to inoculate anything wrong that is being done. And all St. Lucians know that sort of statement. It is okay for me to do it because you used to do it too. What did you do? Political corruption, Madam President, even by definition, is the use of powers by government officials or the network contacts for illegitimate private gain. And Madam President, to illustrate that even more, I want us to just remember a verse of scripture. I think it was it was Timothy, who received a letter from Paul while he was in Asia. Timothy was a young apostle, and Timothy wrote Paul a letter. In his first letter, and I think it's in Timothy 10:6, he said, "For the love of money is the root of all evil." 6:10, that is it. And I ask, why did Paul have to write Timothy that letter, which is in scripture, and he had to tell Timothy for the love of money? It was what was going on in Asia Minor at that time. And Madam President, I do submit that had Paul been in a St. Lucia setting, Paul would have scripted, "For the love of direct purchase procurement is the root of all public sector corruption." Why? Why? Madam President, millions of dollars are spent each year buying goods and services and works. One writer suggested that what it means, this budget, it means ideal opportunities for political corruption. A writer stated that. Contract to suppliers can be awarded without fair competition. This allows companies and political connections to triumph over their rivals. Or companies within the same industry can rig a bid just to get a piece of the action. Madam President, what is important is that the writer said we have found that corruption can add as much as 50% of a project cost. Corruption can add as much as 50% of a project cost. So why am I saying this? We have spent $3 billion. $3 billion. Yes, I know you're going to come with it. This is the only way that you can survive a constructive debate. Yeah, come. You understand? You've spent $3 billion. I'm asking the question, to what extent have we embarked on procurement practices to avoid what have been described? But Madam President, corruption in public procurement isn't just about money. It also reduces the quality of work. It can cost lives. Some buildings have collapsed in certain jurisdictions. And in some places where people procure for medicine, people sell counterfeit medicines when there's no procurement processes. This is how serious it is, Madam President. So what is happening in this country? St. Lucia. Madam President, there's small awards of small contracts being awarded. Madam President, as I've learned from persons, even civil servants receive contracts, and I'll tell you why. People living overseas get contracts? I'm asking. But what is happening, Madam President?
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I stand on Standing Order 47.5. The Senator is imputing improper motives, not only of a single individual because he is not mentioning, but he is imputing improper motives of the entire government of St. Lucia, including the public workers, Madam President. And I think that should cease. That should cease, Madam President.
Honorable Leader of Government Business, let's stick to the substantive motion. You keep insinuating certain things based on excerpts from various people. You're not even telling us the title of those excerpts. They may be pointing to something different, so I'm not clear on the foundation. So I agree. Please continue. Thank
you very much, Madam President. I'm just drawing the background to make a point, Madam President. The question is, I'm asking the question, are civil servants involved in receiving contracts? I'm asking the question, how do we ensure that our procurement system is tight? Are people overseas not represented receiving contracts? I'm asking the question, Madam President. Madam President, there are some practices on the ground where the structure of construction operations in St. Lucia seem almost like it's the passport arrangement where you have a contract agent. Some people have come to me and said to me, Mr. Henry, I must pay this person because he got me the contract. And then you have the contract bearer. Because I couldn't put it on my name, I had to get somebody else to put it on their name. This, inadvertently, if it's correct, would increase the cost of the project. I know I may not be speaking in the context of what's happening in St. Lucia or what's happening in this administration, but I'm highlighting, if that's not the case, that these things are real and we need to look forward to them.
That's why I'm asking you, Senator, to move along, because if you're speaking still in generalities and have nothing specific to offer, please move along.
Madam President, I move on to the issue of serial contracts, Madam President. Madam President, it has not been brought to this board, but I am aware of contractors who continue to be receiving contracts under this administration, and there may be reason for them receiving contracts because there's a tendering process you call serial tendering, Madam President. Serial tendering is when you use one contractor to do similar phases of work. Right, Madam President? Some of which maybe this side can identify with. He said Renault. I've not called any names. Madam President, when you have serial contract, or if for example, Madam President, you have a contractor effecting work for Kentucky, knowing that the outlets are similar and it's repetitive, you will tender with one and then negotiate for them to do the rest because they are doing the same thing. These contracts are called serial contractors, and the form of tendering is called serial tendering. If the government is engaging a contractor in a serial contract on a number of projects, there must be some efficiency for the state to benefit. What are those efficiencies? And it needs to be explained. It cannot be, Madam President, that I'm just calling my friend and giving him a contract all the time. The perception of it. Madam President, I am in this house because I can make a contribution based on my professional training, and I'm making it in accordance with this line. And I'm sure when the member for national security speaks, I listen because he's an expert police officer. As a quantity surveyor, I understand what I'm saying and I know what is going. And if we are not hypocritical, we could all bear and listen to some things when they make sense. But I suspect we want to politicize everything and vaccinate it with this thing. You used to do it too, therefore it's okay. Proceed. But let me move on, Madam President, with St. Jude Hospital. Madam President, even before I proceed, and Madam President, keep me abreast with my time. I know it's 45 minutes I've left. Madam President, I listened to the Prime Minister in his presentation, and he referenced St. Jude Hospital and the audit of St. Jude Hospital. And in a few parliaments ago, I did cause a question to come into this house. Again, consistent with tendering, Madam President. I was concerned upon reading a document that was in circulation, which the Prime Minister happened to make reference to in his presentation, that there is an audit. And the terms of reference of the audit stated that the person who is carrying out the audit is also being told in the terms of reference that upon their finding faults, they'll be given the contract to correct it. So to speak, and I'm translating. And Madam President, there's almost everything wrong with such terms of reference. As a matter of fact, I did not see what you called your CFP, your call for proposal, say that the government has returned, the UWP has now been entrusted with the reins of power. They have entered and meet an incomplete project, and therefore is carrying out an audit, and therefore qualified persons are asked to submit proposals to carry out an audit meeting the following criteria X, Y, and Z. That was not done. And then you may have two two-stage tendering where you submit your proposal and your fees is in one package, and then you open the proposal and see whether the person have the technical competence. If they do, you score it, and the one that have the best score, you open their fee proposal. If the fee proposal is within budget, you do not open the fee proposal of the others. You discard them and you proceed with contract with this one. No. What I heard was a certain firm was hired and was given $1 million to do an audit. But in that proposal, the same consultant was promised a contract to correct the defects. Madam President, if your surgeon performs surgery on somebody, the person dies, he carries out the post-mortem and gives the same person a contract for burial, you would not trust the death certificate or the call. You cannot trust it. You cannot. How could the surgeon become the one who performed the surgery is the one who carries out the post-mortem and then is responsible for offering your burial contract? I'm not politicizing anything. I'm talking about the procurement business. So here we are, Madam President, with St. Jude. Here we are with St. Jude. Madam President, what remains one of the saddest and most eerie Madam President, that is even worse than anything that I've seen that we've done, Madam President. I cannot understand why dealing with life can be treated that way. You know why, Madam President? If you were passing by the roadside and you saw somebody dying, you would not stop and ask, why did somebody else did not stop? You would hasten to do what you can to save the dying person. And that story is in the story of the Samaritan, who on his way saw a man dying on the roadside. He stopped and he helped. But guess what? There was a rabbi who passed him by. He did not ask, why did the rabbi did not help? He helped. You came in and you met the reins of power. You met a hospital to save lives in turmoil. But you spent 3 years on asking, why did this side didn't do this? But guess what has happened, Madam President? They have had more time on St. Jude than we had. And I'll give you if you add the years. We had 54 months, they have had 60-something months. Who has been more constructive? Apres la zot li pou tiye lang zot ek pale tout kalte mo power pou moun ko kwene moun ba ko sa zot ka dia who is more constructive? Ou pa bati fini l'hôpital mais après ça kamade who is been more constructive? Kat moun more, but who is been more constructive? Moun kai more, but who is been more constructive? There's no constructive conversation when people die, my dear. It is to save lives. And I'm telling you, Madam President, what is happening in this country? But, Madam President, the people of St. Lucia have no idea who has prepared the design, but we'll get to that. Madam President, the government has from July 2016 been playing politics with St. Jude. They always seem to be willing to forget they had started the project in 2010.
Senator Henry, you have 15 more minutes for your submission. And remember to keep your language parliamentary. It's Honorable Senator and not my dear.
Honorable Senators, thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. Yes. They always forget, Madam President. They always forget that they first said the reconstruction would cost US $2 million and they would take 6 months to complete. It was said right here, Madam President, by the member for Castries North when he was Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. The member for Castries South always seemed, ready to forget that he saw the plans for St. Jude Hospital, and so did the Prime Minister. They were both members of the same government when the plans were appeared. And Madam President, I too saw the plans during that time while I was unemployed in the public service or the St. Lucia Social Development door. The very door sizes they complain about were approved by them, Madam President. The very corridor widths they complain about were approved under their watch. The very location of the amenities on the ground floor in the surgical and east wing, which day to day want to abandon, were approved by them. The very ramps they would say were not to standard were the original ramps of the hospital when they were first built in the 1940s. Madam President, of course, standards do change, but they approved them back then. And in fact, Madam President, it was the St. Jude board itself which was part of the oversight committee of the hospital, which insisted on keeping the ramps, even though the hospital was being fitted out with 2 elevators. And Madam President, I know that, because when Victoria Hospital wing got built, we maintained what was there. Not only it's possible to maintain, Madam President, we still have equipment that is operational that can work within the corridors. Then you're shy Matuila, Madam President. And the very own Minister of Health in the last administration has publicly said so. They seem to forget that they were the ones who in August 2011 agreed to abandon the idea of building a new hospital at another site in Borsejou, near the George Odlum Stadium, but to concentrate all the efforts on the current site of St. Jude. Madam President, all this government has done with respect to St. Jude is to prolong its course so that it can become maybe another job. They claim they were going to launch a forensic audit into the malfeasance, and of course we know that $1 million was spent in the audit, but they have not made it a document of the House. It will come. I've read it. They consistently gave false information about the amount of money spent on St. Jude Hospital, which they found in June 2016. Madam President, the government estimates, which were published for the financial year 2017-2018, clearly stated on page 504 that the amount spent thus far on St. Jude Hospital project was $96,716,164. But they kept on claiming that $118 million was spent. And all the time, Madam President, they had nearly $40 million in resources to complete the hospital. All the time. And the balance of the loan from the Ex-Im Bank of the Republic of China and Taiwan. Madam President, when the St. Lucia Labour Party inherited the St. Jude Hospital reconstruction project, the plans were largely in train. The only changes that were made to improve on the facility, the MP, and I will list them just now, Madam President. The MP for Castries Southeast was on TV some time ago saying, Madam President, complaining about the size of the accident and emergency department. Madam President, the accident and emergency department was being completed up until July 2016, and it was 30% larger than the one that was approved in their design. The one he said that was too small was 30% larger than the one that was approved by them. Madam President, there were other design changes made. For example, the original design prepared by the Taiwanese had 6 beds per ward room. The new standard, Madam President, is a maximum of 4 beds per ward room. Madam President, the St. Jude Hospital Board itself were the ones who called for more private and semi-private inpatient rooms. They saw that as a means of improving the comfort of patients while being an important revenue stream for the hospital. In fact, Madam President, most hospitals being built in the developed world are generally all private rooms. People want greater privacy, Madam President. And this added 7,000 square feet to the East Wing and was in keeping with the recommendation of the Accreditation Canada. Madam President, when the Labour Party inherited St. Jude, we never stopped the project. The Labour Party never complained about the project, what they did before. They continued the work. We had to source more resources for the project. We sourced more grant aid from the Taiwanese government from the German government and from the Australian government. There was no money budgeted for a diagnostic equipment to outfit the endoscopy suites, or the CT scan, or fluoroscopy and the rest, Madam President. That all had to be arranged during the SLP administration. And there were delays, Madam President. No doubt there are delays. There are delays, Madam President. The St. Jude Hospital is a different kettle of fish to the OKEU. The St. Jude Hospital is being built mainly of a superstructure, but it rests on a 1940 complex. And of course, there were some compromises made. Madam President, when you're constructing a hospital, it takes time. I heard the leader for government business said that, okay, you started in 2009, but I wish to correct the leader of government business, because I was in the employment of the architectural section, Ministry of Planning, in 1991, and when I came there, okay, you had already started. Madam President, it's easy for us to be flippant about the development, these development projects. They are very complex. If you go to some rooms of the Victoria Hospital, you would see models of other solutions that were recommended by other architects. And there's a lot of discussion that went into reaching to where we got there. And sometimes, Madam President, sometimes, and I say people who are lay people, Madam President.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, on a point of order, the member is misleading the House, Madam President, because I said the hospital started. He's talking about the plans for the hospital. There is no way I would know when the plans started for the hospital. It could start in somebody's head. So I am talking about when the hospital actually started, Madam President, and he's misleading the House. And we have young children in the House, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator Henry, Leader of Government Business suggests that she was speaking to the construction and you're speaking to plans.
Madam President, the Leader of Government Business never said the construction. She said the hospitals. And Madam President, at that level of discussion in the House, we're speaking about project development, implementation. You cannot discuss a project and you're not talking about the start on what processes go through. Because these are some of the things, Madam President, that cause, and I was making the point, Madam President. It's very easy, Madam President, for an administration to come and see somebody doing something and assume that, hey, stop this, I will do it my way.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President.
Proceed.
Can I proceed? Yes. It's easy, Madam President, for somebody to believe that you must just stop, not recognizing the value of contributions made to get this where it is. And this is the nature of development. The part that you do not see is important. You weren't aware that...
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I'm sorry I have to keep standing like that, but on a point of elucidation, Madam President, I would like to state that I was not referring to the plans and whatever was in somebody's
Honorable
head.
Leader of Government Business, Senator, she stands on a point of elucidation.
Madam President, according to point of elucidation, should I? You know that to be?
It's up to you, I'm asking you.
No, Madam President, I'd like to proceed if you'll elucidation.
Madam President, I clearly stated that the hospital started. And what I meant was the hospital started in terms of they started building the hospital. I just want to clarify so that the fellow senator is aware. I was not talking about the plans and whatever was in somebody's head and that sort of thing. So he can make his point, but Madam President, I would like to just clarify that when I say start, I mean start. I start to build my house. I am not talking about the plans at the Department of planning and so on. I start to build the house.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. And fellow Senator, whereas I want to accept your elucidation of the statement you've made, but deeper than that, we must have an appreciation for developmental processes. Because if you build in a house, as much as the house might take a construction period of 6 months, Madam President, it will take sometimes almost 1 year to complete the plans. And the plans are very important. You must prepare the plans, you must prepare your bills of quantities, you must prepare contract document, you must source money. Developing a project involves a number of stages. And one cannot just come and flippantly make a point about this project has not started, this and that. But leave that alone, Madam President, because Madam President, I would like to regain my 5 or 10 minutes that she used of my time and just bring this thing to an end.
Senator Henry, you have 8 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. I will
your
do with that. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, what was in train for completion by February 2017 is now going to take us another 3 years. And after all that they have said, I understood that there are no approved drawings. Their very own report stated that there are no approved drawings. We are told of a new wing to replace the east wing and surgical wing, Madam President. You and the public, Madam President, by now would not be aware that those are the 2 largest buildings in the St. Jude complex. The core of St. Jude Hospital are 3 connecting buildings, Madam President. The east wing, the surgical wing, and the west wing. The west wing is the administrative wing, with also the kitchen, the cafeteria, the staff on-call room. However, the major medical services of the hospital are in the east wing and the surgical wing. These 2 wings combined have a floor area, Madam President, of 75,000 square feet. 75,000 square feet. 1 3/4 of an acre of building space, Madam President. Can you imagine someone saying this is too small? 1 acre of building space. Madam President, you could take 1 acre of land and divide it into 10 lots. But here you have 1 hospital area, 1 3/4 of an acre. 43,560 square foot is 1 acre. If you multiply it by 2, you have about 80 square foot. This is 75,000 square foot of building space, just those 2 wings. I ask the question, why? 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 Madam President, another bewildering situation is the funding for this new wing. Based on the Prime Minister's pronouncement, it will cost $82 million. $82 million. Whereas we needed $40 million to complete the hospital. But we need $82 million to build a new wing. Then he says the Taiwanese have approved another loan of $54 million. Madam President, I don't even know how to speak to it further, but to suggest if we allow the administration to run the course of what is happening, you will have a St. Jude 2.0. The same thing that happened will happen again if this continues. Because construction is very risky, Madam President. Very risky. And that is why, Madam President, I'm concerned about some of the things that I see happening. Madam President, one example is that for every construction award of contract, I see persons receiving advance payments. Advance payments usually 10 to 15%, but I notice some contractors receive as much as 20%. One contractor have a contract for $4 million to do some work. He received almost 700 and something thousand dollars. He had not started. Madam President, in my own time at the Ministry of Planning, a contractor once received an advance payment and he went to university and he never came back. And I asked the question, do we ask the contractors to provide advance payment bonds? Do we ask them? I'm just asking. Do we ask the contractors to provide advance payment bonds? Because it is not just a performance bond that you need when you give an advance payment of that magnitude. Of course we trust our local people. I'm not suggesting that trust is never part of the business. But I'm saying that in the business that we are in today, what is at risk? I notice everybody's queuing and they're coming. They're coming, they're coming, they're coming. I know y'all will be coming. Yeah. The St. Lucia Medical and Dental Association, many technical professionals told the government not to spend more at the George Odlum Stadium. I know y'all will be coming.
Senator Henry, please wrap up.
Yes, Madam President. They asked them not to, but they did. Madam President, in the time we're living in, governments must learn to listen. Greed has no place in governance. Malice has no place in governance. Politics should not have no place with people's health. And a government should never feel too powerful that it is unable to take counsel from its people. But I'm not surprised, Madam President. I heard in the lower house a statement made that the opposition statements are irrelevant. And finally, Madam President, just let me close on these few statements. Just on a few statements. And I'm just on that of leadership, Madam President. Madam President, it was Robert Glazer, and of course the students through you, Madam President, sitting here, those who follow basketball would remember that Magic Johnson, the president of the Lakers, resigned sometime last month or a few weeks ago. And it was Robert Glazer who wrote on the resignation of Magic Johnson. And I quote in his short paper, "You can't and shouldn't expect a person will change their personality or temperament when they take on a leadership role. Leadership often doesn't change a person's character. It reveals their character and magnifies their core values." Johnson understood he was not an ideal fit for the job. Leaders have to take a deep look at themselves, what they value, what they do well, what their flaws are. It requires considerable amount of introspection. The best thing you can do is to be authentically yourself, rather than trying to change yourself drastically. If your personality and temperament isn't suited for the role, often the best thing you can do is to exit. Madam President, with these words, I want to thank you for your patience. Thank you very much.